Hello everyone, my name is Pavitra and I'm from the Association of Singapore Marine Industries and I'll be your host for today. I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, the emerging demand of LNG in Asia and the role of Singapore's M&OE sector. This session is organized as part of Marine Week 2021, an annual collaboration between NTUC, E2I, and SME to highlight and discuss industry concerns. This year's event takes place from 5th to 7th October and will comprise of a series of activities such as keynotes, webinars, and a dedicated recruitment drive. The theme this year is Essential Thrust Towards Sustainability. We would like to thank our supporting organization, Bureau Veritas, IHS Market, Penguin International Limited, Sea Forest Engineering, and the Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers for your continuous support. In support of Singapore Jobs and Skills powered by NTUC Jobs Security Council. First up, we will just run through some simple admin matters. We will just get everyone to go ahead and scan the QR code using your phones, or you can just click on the link which is just sent in the chat box. It will then lead you to an app called Slido. Feel free to drop your question into the text box anytime throughout the presentation, and we will be trying to answer them during the Q&A session. Okay, a quick run through of today's program. First, we have the sharing session by Mr. Ashish Anilan, Sustainability Leader, Gas and Alternative Renewable Energy ICARE from Bureau Veritas, who will be sharing on Asia's market demand for LNG and how Singapore is repositioning itself as an LNG hub to the region with efforts by M&OE companies. Participants can learn more about potential job opportunities and the type of skill sets required to be involved in LNG work. And after the sharing session, we will have our Q&A session where our speaker will answer your questions. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Ashish Anilan, Sustainability Leader, Gas and Alternative Renewable Energy, ICARE from Bureau Veritas. Mr. Ashish, please.
Thank you, Pavli. Just give me a second. I'm going to pull up my slides. All right. Thank you, Pavi, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining the webinar today. A very good morning to all of you. Ashish here, and I function as Sustainability Leader at Bureau Veritas under a new Center of Excellence called ICARE. And today I will be covering specific topics on the emerging demand of LNG in Asia and the role of Singapore's marine and offshore engineering sector. The plan is we will be starting with a macro level initiative towards net zero and how the industry is adapting to it. And as topic is on LNG, so we're going to focus a bit more towards the role of LNG in decarbonization and some of the key LNG related projects and initiatives, and also jobs specific to M&OE sector in Singapore. So before going into the details, I would like to give a brief introduction of BB and also ICARE as a Center of Excellence. So we are a leading classification society with more than 75,000 employees worldwide and a history close to 200 years. The M&O sector, which stands for the Marine and Offshore sector of BV, has more than 11,000 vessels plus under us. That corresponds to about 130 million gross tonnage of vessels. And since we're on LNG today, we have more than 300 gas carriers and about 24% of the world's LNG carrier order book that is with BV now. As for ICARE, as I mentioned earlier, so ICARE is a newly formed Center of Excellence for Innovation and Sustainability related initiative within BBMNO actually. So it stands for Innovation and Center of Alternate Renewable Energy. But in a nutshell, we are looking at a very collaborative platform to venture into new projects and technologies and innovation opportunities where we bring in the expertise within BV across the board, and also a collective strength of the industry stakeholders and even IHLs that will actually build through this ecosystem and the projects and services that we cater. So the projects that we talk about can be anything that is related to the area of focus that is actually shown on the slide. The idea is we help company like yours to co-create innovative and sustainable projects by identifying the gaps and also identifying the low-hanging fruits and by bringing in the right stakeholders. We will be happy to discuss with you any of the ideas or initiatives that you might have, be it at an individual level or startup company or organization or even for industry. So moving on and back to today's topic. So let's touch a bit on Singapore's maritime sector. Historically, we have been blessed with a very strategic location along the trade lines. But what has also helped us is Singapore over the time evolving as a maritime and bunkering hub. So this industry is one of our core strengths and contributing to about 7% of Singapore's GDP, employs more than 160,000 people. And we have been consistently named as the top maritime capital, bunkering capital of the world over these years. We are also home to more than 140 top shipping groups in Singapore. So there's so much ongoing, right? But if I could summarize, the maritime in Singapore is vital and it's here to stay. And there will always be focus and support for this sector. And to make it happen, MPA is working very closely with the various stakeholders and industry association to ensure that we continue to stay on top of the game. And that also means monitoring the new trends that is evolving around the industry, which will also be the trends that will be affecting the M&OE sector, right? So can be broadly categorized into decarbonization, digitization, and disruption. We won't be going into the details of all of them today, but just want to bring the focus back to decarbonization as one of the key pillars. So why decarbonization is so important is the fact that climate change is something very real, and the global community is actually shying away from a full commitment to minimize the impact of climate change. Not sure whether you're aware, but the last decade was actually the warmest decade ever recorded, and 2019 was the warmest year. And it's not something that is happening around the world or elsewhere in the world. Singapore was not an assumption as well. So 2019, we had an average temperature of 28.44 degree. And that was actually the warmest year that was ever recorded. And 2019 was also the third driest year we had ever since 1869 as per NEA. So the thing is that if you don't take any action, the average global temperature will continue to raise to more than 3 degrees Celsius. So what does it mean? There was this interesting video in the basement of Cloud Forest. If you have visited it, I think they recently moved it with all the control measures. It was showing about the incremental change in temperature and how is that going to affect Earth. The idea is if the temperature were to go beyond 2.5 degree, the planet would actually be as warm as it was 3 million years ago. And clearly by then, the climate and the associated animals and the plant species was entirely different. And none of us, we want to be there, right? So if 2.5 degrees is so bad, and the question is, where are we now? So the fact is we are actually at 1.1 degree currently. It was actually 1.5, but due to some of the aerosol emission, we managed to bring it down a few more. So at 1.1 degree, and it will continue to raise. So it's expected to go up by 0.2 degree per every decade. And actually by early 2030s, we're going to hit 1.5 degree. This is inevitable. It will continue to go up. So the question is what we're going to do beyond 2020 or 2030 at 1.5. Do we want to continue to bring it up or do something about it? So the idea is to keep it at 1.5 and then bring it down eventually in the later part of the century. So that's where the Paris Agreement come into picture. So it's about the countries around the world, almost all of them, coming together to pursue effort to minimize the global warming to well below 2 degree and preferably 1.5. And also about to prepare for any unavoidable temperature rise that we have, and also about helping the developing nations in their own effort to actually bring down their emissions and providing some financial support for it. The beauty about Paris Agreement was that it didn't enforce any kind of emissions to any of the countries, but encouraged the nations to come up with their own targets, which they call NDCs, nationally determined contributions. And these contributions will actually be revised in every 5 years. And also there will be a global stocktake that comes in the 5 years interval. So that is on the global picture and about global warming. So how does it specifically apply to maritime sector? So if we want to keep the temperature 1.5 degree, it means that we have to have a net zero CO2 emissions coming from shipping globally by 2050. Not just on CO2, but it's also about the non-CO2 forces, especially on methane. So if you refer to the graph on the right, it shows the business as usual scenario, and it will continue to go up. But bringing in some of the measures, especially those related to design or operation, or even bringing in new technologies and fuels, we will be able to bring down the CO2 emissions. And more ambitiously, we can actually bring it down to net zero by 2050. But it's also a fact that maritime is contributing to about 70% of the global trade by volume, by value, actually, I'm sorry. And it's also emitting about 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's absolutely necessary to decarbonize maritime. But it's also the fact that the maritime way of transporting goods and cargoes is a lot more economically efficient or viable. So we are about 25 times more efficient than air freight and about 2 to 3 times more efficient than truck freight. So a reduced shipping costs also means that a reduced room for innovation and investment. And that's where IMO come into picture. So IMO has adopted some mandatory measures to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. These are generally captured under MARPOL, be it in the form of EDI or SEMP, or recent EXI and CII. But I want to bring the focus back to initial greenhouse strategy of IMO. Well, in a bigger scale, the plan is actually to bring down the greenhouse gas emission by 50% in 2050 as compared to 2008 level. And particularly about CO2, the plan is to bring it down by 40% by 2030 and by 70% in 2050. And to achieve this, it was actually grouped into three categories. So there was a short-term, mid-term, and the long-term, which extends from 2018. There's a typo. 2018 to 2023, and then 23 to 2030 for midterm, and beyond that for long term. I think the interesting fact here is that the low carbon fuels and the zero carbon fuels are actually part of midterm and long term strategy. And it is of particular importance of LNG because it's a fuel that is proven and well established for today. So we are in 2021 and 2030 is just around the corner. So I think it's a good juncture to think about the options we have. So there are going to be a variety of fuels that can potentially be used to meet the zero carbon or low carbon requirements. Not just about the fuels, I think we have a lot different kind of ships as well, though it's actually on a near shore or it's actually going further offshore and long distance voyages. There's also about geographical elements, like for example, if you go to Europe, it's naturally blessed with renewables. So there's an advantage when it comes to the adoption of the new fuels. Economic situations are very important as well, especially if you look at the developed countries versus developing countries, the appetite for adopting this or paying for the premium for the fuels matters a lot. Maturity of the technology, I think, is another one element. Considering the ships have about 20 to 25 years of a design life, we want to pick something that has actually a very high TRL or something that is well established and proven. So when it comes to future fuels, the next decade will be very crucial to identify who actually going to win the race. But clearly, it's not going to be one clear winner. And definitely, there's no crystal balls, and nobody will be able to make any predictions. But it's likely going to be a combination of multiple fuels that is suited for each of the vessel type, trade patterns, operation area, or even supported by the green ambitions of the countries or region. So that makes it a bit difficult to make decisions. But at BV, we do a part. We are supporting decent reviews and formulation of new rules and guidelines. We have very strong presence in IMO and regulatory elements. We also support our clients in the form of JDPs and JIPs and AIPs when it comes to innovative projects and industry-wide fuel adoptions. So if you're identifying LNG as one of the key candidates, I think there should be a reason for it, right? So like I said, IMO 2030 is where there will be first emission targets of minus 40% will kick in. And this is less than 10 years away. So for the decision makers, they will basically have two options. One is to use LNG and adopt LNG now and to leverage on all the benefits and environmental emission reduction it has. And otherwise, we can actually continue to wait for a new fuel to emerge, which nobody knows when, right? So the idea is we also do not want to wait, and considering that the climate change is a very serious issue. So like I said, LNG is actually proven and available based on today's technology. Uh, And we are not saying that LNG is the end, right? Because definitely there's beyond LNG for net zero. But LNG is also a leap ahead as compared to conventional solution for coal or HFO for the matter. The infrastructures are well established, and there's a wider acceptance of LNG these days. So based on the Clarkson report, about 30% of the global new order book will be actually based on LNG fuel vessel. That's based on gross tonnage. And the beauty about LNG is that there aren't any SOx or particulate matter emissions. And NOx emissions are significantly lesser to the extent that we can actually meet the requirements of ECA zones without having any after treatment, of course, depending on the engine technology. But it also means that we don't need to worry too much about the waste disposal, like in the case of a scrubber. And also the fact that LNG vaporizes, so in the event there is any spillage, we won't be actually having a drastic impact on the marine life, like in the case of oil spill. Of course, there will be emissions to the atmosphere from methane and all, but we are talking about emergency situation here, right? And LNG might not be able to meet the requirements of IMO 2030 of its own, but if we were to add that on together with the design improvements or addition of dropping fuels, that shouldn't be much of an issue. So all these are happening at maritime. And if you were to look at the shore side, about 30% of the global power is coming from coal. And coal will gradually start to transit towards LNG. We're going to cover that in a second. Also for Singapore specifically, EMA has already mentioned that natural gas will remain one of the four key pillars for the power grid in Singapore. And LNG is also needed for the transition towards zero carbon fuels because the green fuels will eventually be achieved through blue. So it's important to actually use LNG as a feedstock to produce hydrogen and possibly associated with the carbon capture. So while the demand of LNG will remain high, the LNG projects will be there as well, and also the LNG ecosystem. So moving on to talk about LNG specifically in Asia, if you were to see the graph on the right, this is extracted from IEA. And talking about the total energy demand in Southeast Asia and projected towards 2050, so the deep what we see is actually 2020, and that's also when COVID kicked in, and the demand has actually recovered back. Towards the 2030 period, we can also see some of the emergence of clean technology or green technology like wind and solar that comes in. But if you look at the traditional sources, I think the only fuel that goes down is actually coal. And likely the portion of the coal will be taken up by LNG. And LNG will still remain relevant in 2050. So current demand of LNG globally is about 340 million metric tons, expected to grow to about 700 million tons by 2040 in 20 years' time. And out of this increase in demand, about 75% will come from Asia. So that's very significant. And if you were to go down and look at that, the chart at the bottom, that's actually from Bloomberg, this actually looking at LNG specifically, but in a global scale and also in a shorter time frame. So it's from now till 2025. We can actually see that the demand goes up to 400 million metric tons. And out of the 400, 26 and 22, which is close to 50%, is actually coming from South Asia and Southeast Asia. And as I mentioned earlier, so LNG fuel vessels has reached about 30% of the global order. And they're going to be about 45 LNG bunker vessels as well, expected by 2023. While 45 itself is not a big number, but it's a significant achievement actually, because the very first purpose-built LNG bunker vessel, NG Cebrel, was actually started operating only in 2017. That was just 4 years ago. So Singapore, being the bunker hub of the world, we manage about 50 MTPA of bunker fuel. That's actually about 20% of the global total, so it's quite significant. And with all that demand of LNG starting to grow in Asia, clearly we also want to become an LNG bunkering hub of the world. In addition to that, I think it's also the fact that due to our geographical limitations, we won't be able to leverage much on alternate renewables, like in the case of hydro or geothermal sources, right? So again, we are blessed with that amazing geographical position, the transparency that we built over the time about the quality and the quantity of the bunker fuels, and all the regulatory support and the presence of various stakeholders that will help Singapore in this journey. So when you look at Singapore's LNG scene specifically, I think one of the significant milestone was actually establishment of Singapore LNG terminal. So SLNG started operation in 2013, And over the time, they have increased the capacity, and also they have made significant modifications to actually suit the downstream LNG application. So hopefully we'll cover that in a while later. But SLNG is a regasification terminal, so clearly most of the LNG that comes in is regasified, and it's actually sent to that national grid for to be used by industry or power plants. The fact is 95% of Singapore's gencos are actually using natural gas for the fuel. Historically, we used to leverage a lot towards imported natural gas from Malaysia and Indonesia, but over the time, we have built the resilience and also to tap on SLNG's resources to supply these. So we are actually very sorry sorry about that. Okay, I got to do this. I think another significant improvement or the action that we have taken is about the LNG pilot bunkering program that we started in 2015. So as part of this, 3 licenses have been awarded for LNG bunkering, 2 at first and recently 1 more, to Fuel LNG, Pavilion and Total Marine Fuels. Together with that, MPA also give a lot of incentive for the early adopters of LNG, be it for LNG fuel vessels or bunker vessels. We also come up with new standards and regulations and safety considerations for LNG bunkering under Tier 56. So some of the key LNG projects in Singapore are actually shown on this slide as well. The second one on the left is Keppel Smith dual fuel tugboats, the first dual fuel vessels or LNG fuel vessels in Singapore. And then the one on the top right is actually PSA's dual fuel tugs as well. If you look at it, these 2 vessels, or the tugboats in general, is engineering marvelous because incorporating all the recommendations and considerations of IGF and using a cryogenic fluid within a 30-meter vessel is not easy, and we have done it. And I think on the top left is actually the hybrid single fuel gas vessel tugboat that is actually being developed by Sembcorp Marine. And also is another 12K bunker vessel, the one on the top left, also being built by Sembcorp Marine for Pavilion Energy. This vessel is a bit special because we are using GTT membrane tank on it. And the idea is actually a bit unique because some of the capacity of this vessel, we tend to go with the pressurized type C tanks. Both the 12K vessel and the PSA tugs actually class and VV. Towards the right side, the first vessel, the second one on the right is actually Marine Viking. So this is Sinaju or Vitol's dual fuel bunker tanker and Singapore's very first LNG fuel bunker tanker for traditional MG or MDO. And the one next to it is Fuel LNG's Bellina 7.5K bunker vessel, purposely designed and built for LNG bunkering in Singapore. Currently in operation, it's completed quite a number of operations and even recently completed a Simons operation for the CMS container vessels. Last but not least, the last picture on the right side is actually this is a floating living lab, a small-scale microgrid LNG to power solution being built by Keppel. Together, in addition to being an LNG to power solution, it's also a test bedding for new technologies. So moving on about the job opportunities related to LNG value chain, right? So I think it's important to understand the value chain of LNG before we go into the jobs. So Singapore being an gas importing country, we actually start with LNG carriers. So the global fleet of LNG carrier is more than 640 vessels as of end of 2020, and LNGs varies in size. So the biggest ones being about 260,000 meter cube. And the repairs and upgrading of LNG carriers is actually one of the major work being done in Singapore's shipyards. In fact, the repair capacity is concentrated in Asia, mostly in Singapore and Japan, with some of the Middle East countries coming into picture recently. One of the sustainable approach is to extend the life of the LNG carriers to reuse it for other applications like FSUs and FSRUs, or even FLNGs and LNG to power ships. And once LNG reaches to the shore, we're going to store it. This can be onshore and offshore as well. So we mentioned about SLNG earlier, which is our onshore LNG terminal in Singapore. Recently, EMA has also put out requests for interest on OLT, which is an offshore LNG terminal or an FSRU. So there's a potential for FSRUs as well. So these are regas terminals. So generally the gas is regasified and sent to the grid, like I mentioned earlier. But in addition to that, they also provide ancillary services, which is mostly about LNG break bulking or LNG bunkering. So break bulking is a process where LNG is redistributed within the region in a smaller quantities and also filled to bunker vessels to serve the LNG fuel vessels. So these ship-to-ship operations actually perform within the port or alongside. And I think the key is actually to have SIMOS eventually, which will actually reduce the port time clearly, but at the same time will reduce the emissions as well, the lesser time the vessels spend in the port. Yeah. And then there is also a truck-to-ship bunkering facility, which is also can be used to serve marine customers, especially the tugboats that we saw in the previous picture, the slide. The idea of ISO containers is actually to serve the customers who won't be able to take up larger volumes from a ship. So this also opens up opportunities for other players like Jurong Port, who has been providing truck-to-ship bunkering facilities here. So moving on, LNG as an importing country, so let's call us as a downstream LNG value chain players, right? So as the industry evolved, it also created various stakeholders. So as I mentioned, we are on a constant lookout for new fuels. I think Melvin also mentioned earlier about that floating wings, but it doesn't mean that we should stop our efforts on LNG. So it's about adapting for today and transforming for tomorrow. So clearly, government and government agencies are one of the major stakeholders. So MPA for marine and EMA for shore applications, and they require technical talent when managing some of the various stakeholders. And depending on the position, the skills required should generally be transferable. And this is also where the bridging courses and trainings will come into picture. And we're going to cover that in the next slide in a moment. And beyond the government agencies, there's also trade associations, people like ASME or SNAMES or SSA. And the idea is to promote the interest and advancement of marine industries in Singapore at the same time ensuring that no one is actually left out from the value chain. We can talk about LNG suppliers, which are generally called aggregators. They require the market knowledge on LNG, mostly on the commercial side. And the positions expected should mostly on market development teams and LNG trading. There should also be cargo logistics and operational elements to it. So traditionally, Shell and Pavilion are the aggregators in Singapore, but recently EMA has awarded 2 more licenses to Exxon and Semco Fuels here. So beyond that, we have LNG ship owners and operators, which is a very large ecosystem. But if you were to focus on the shore-based roles for some of these companies, they do require both technical and commercial positions related to LNG. And it's also important to understand the fleet and the fleet operations for them. And the positions such as operation coordinators, analysts, traders, and commercial BD positions, etc., should be open there. And then comes to terminals, right? So we have SLNG, like we mentioned earlier, one of the key players, and we also have Jurong Port and PSA terminals. Our ports are mostly shore-based, but there's a lot of interaction with the M&OE sector, so hence the knowledge should also be generally transferable. Bunker operators, 3 of them, as we went through earlier, they focus on LNG bunkering, so it's very important to understand the market knowledge of LNG and its application to go in there. Position should be mostly related to technical BD and commercial. And then we have shipyards. So the fact is we are home to one of the best shipyards in the world. And the LNG experience is a key strength that is required in our yards and require skills and expertise across various positions related to LNG. As a start, we can talk about mechanical, electrical, and system engineers, and project management for someone who doesn't want to go so technical, right? And they also offer R&T related or commercial BD positions. There are always HSC, operational or quality related positions as well. And also the fact that shipyards actually work very closely with the designers and class and subcontractors. Yeah. So designers and class generally, we are a lot more technically oriented. So we look at positions that is, naval arc, machinery, electrical cargo system related. But being said that, there's also BD commercial roles available. OEMs, again, is a very large ecosystem, but we can actually look at main engine suppliers or suppliers related to cargo tanks or cargo system as a key one. Depending on these players and also their presence and strategy for Singapore, the position can be both technical and commercial. If we were to move on to contractors and subcontractors, we talk about project management positions and technicians and supervisors, etc. R&D can actually be done both in universities and also any of the stakeholders. Yeah. I was actually saving the other options like HR or legal, administrative, finance, etc. for the last because they can be applied across the industry to any of the sectors. But being said that, I think it's very important to understand the fundamentals of the industry. And if you recall, the core skills that you require to penetrate the LNG industry is actually quite generic. And irrespective of where you are, a student or a graduate or existing employee in a shipyard trying to move into LNG, or even someone outside the M&OE sector, right? Just be assured that your existing know-how can actually be utilized for LNG applications, but probably requires a bit of a push or a motivation. And we're going to talk about this now, yeah? So in terms of job opportunities and how to grow your career to move into LNG, I think one of the clear path is to go along the education way. There are courses that is being offered by our unis and polis and IT specific to maritime industry. And the LNG related knowledge is actually part of the curriculum. You can find the courses that is mainstream with specialization in marine or even specifically marine related courses. But if you're a student or someone who actually want to go back to college to study, I would suggest that you can go to Maritime Singapore Connect website because they have consolidated and provided a very detailed list of the courses that is related to maritime there. But the thing is that some of these courses can actually stretch to multiple years, especially if you are looking into part-time basis. Yeah? So that's where the help comes in, right? Because there are specific LNG trainings and courses that will help with upskilling and reskilling. These are a few days or a few week kind of courses, and they're very specific to LNG and maritime decarbonization. And I will be happy to share more on some of these later. But the good news is that there are a lot of supports, grants, and scholarships for taking up some of these courses. Like, for example, ASME offers this marine PCP program, a professional conversion program that is looking at a mid-career PMEDs to actually go through some kind of skill conversion and some transition to actually look for the sectors that will provide prospects for progression. Yeah. So the idea is actually to matchmaking in terms of skills because we know the employer's requirement and it's actually about preparing the employee for fit for purpose. Yeah. So skill future is another one area where you can tap on some of the support. Comes in two forms. I think there's a skill future study program that is looking at fresh graduates who want to have a head start in the career, and study awards looking more of early to mid-career Singaporeans who want to committed to developing their own skills and having relevant records, references, and work experience as well. MCF, Maritime Cluster Fund, that is under MPA, is also one of that area. So there's a training element of MCF that promote upgrading of knowledge and expertise through attending some of the courses that is endorsed by MPA. There are short courses and there are also long ones if you're interested. There's a lot of funding coming in as well in terms of scholarships. So recently SMF, sorry, announced that they actually secured more than 2.5 million pledge in scholarship from maritime community under a Maritime One scholarship. So the idea is there's a lot of sponsorships and traineeships and attachment program that is available if any of you want to explore the maritime industry or the opportunities, especially those related to LNG. They can be accessed via ASME or E2I or Maritime Singapore Connect or any of the other marine trade associations. You can also approach the respective companies on various internship and scholarship opportunities. Again, try going back to the Maritime Connect website. They have a lot of information out there. So my last slide for today, I just want to summarize that the climate change is real and it's not something that should actually be done at a country or a global picture, but each of us, I think the individual contributions, they count as well, and we should really do our part. And there are no silver bullet when it comes to what will be the ultimate fuel. We need to continue to monitor, and what we are assured is actually LNG will be alongside as a transition fuel towards sustainability. And specifically for Singapore's maritime sector is very vital, very important, and it will continue to stay here. And on LNG in Singapore, there are going to be a lot of opportunities and there are going to be a lot of support for you to venture into it. And that's all from me. And thank you so much and open for questions. And back to you, Pavi.
Thank you, Mr. Ashish Anilan, for the insightful sharing. That was a great sharing session indeed. Okay, next up, we will move on to Q&A session. I can see quite a few questions here. Okay, we have a question by Lukman. He asked, do you foresee somewhere in the far future where LNG will be replaced with other carbon neutral fuel for shipping, such as hydrogen, solar, wind, etc.?
Okay, yes. I mean, we can't deny it because this is a move towards net zero, right? So we all acknowledge, and I think I also put that in the slide to say that LNG is going to be a transition fuel towards sustainability. Of course, this means we can continue to have more drop-in fuels, be it in the biofuels or synthetic fuels, that will continue to support and make sure LNG stays in this journey towards 2050. But at the same time, there will also be a penetration of newer fuels. But just they're going to take a while. And like I said, this is going to be a blend of multiple fuels. It's not just about one fuel. It's not just about one guy winning and the rest fails. So they're all going to actually stay alongside. But depending on certain sectors, like for example, a short sea shipping, this is particularly where hydrogen will be a lot more appealing because the trade patterns are predictable. The vessel can come alongside end of the day. If you're looking at vessels that is more towards the deep sea, then ammonia could potentially be a good candidate that we are looking at. And yeah, so there's wind assisted propulsion. I think this will complement. And of course, even we could talk about nuclear, there's also discussions ongoing about it. So yes, it's going to be a lot of candidates and all of them staying together.
Okay. Okay, the next question is, how is Asian countries and specifically Singapore approaching the commitments under Paris Agreement?
Okay, so Paris Agreement actually had almost 200, 195 countries to be specific, who joined this agreement, and all Asian countries, including North Korea, essentially part of the agreement. And I think it's very important because Asia contributes to more than 50% of global emissions. The idea was the signatories were supposed to go back at the end of 5-year period to update their NDCs, right? So it started in 2015, so it was due in 2020, but delayed for a year because of COVID. And the fact is, some of the countries, I think India, did not officially update their pledges. For China, they had actually updated the target, but yet to be officially submitted. And people like Japan and Korea have submitted their NDCs actually with a new target. But the fact is, even the new target is not enough for us to keep the temperature within 1.5. So we are hoping to see more commitments coming in and new targets setting if it's not in 2020, but by 2025. So Singapore in particular, we signed the Paris Agreement in 2016, and we submitted our updated NDC in 2020 March. The idea was actually we will reduce the absolute emissions to about 65 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in 2030. And the idea was actually to bring it even half by 2050, and then to move towards a net zero towards the second half of the century. If you are keen to know more, I think there is a very interesting published information at the NCCS website that is actually called Take Action Today and for Carbon Efficient Singapore. Quite interesting, but again, we are no assumption. I think the commitment that we have is also not enough to reach 1.5-degree targets.
Okay. Okay, the next one is, can you share more on the LNG specific courses currently available?
Yes, okay. So there are a number of courses that is being conducted, sponsored by ASME and other stakeholders. And the good thing is actually, like I said, there's a lot of fundings and support in terms of, so probably you're going to pay a lot lesser than the actual course fee. One of them is actually a primer course on LNG production, vessel design and operation. This is actually organized by ASME's names and Yan Poly. The idea is to cover the introduction to LNG and natural gas and look into, storage and transportation options and about the market situation and pricing mechanisms, even about a bit more technical going into various technologies on LNG production, regasification, the concepts of LNG carriers and bunker vessels and what it means to have LNG bunkering. I think in addition to that, it's also very important to understand when we move towards decarbonization to measure what is decarbonization and how much is actually the reductions we have. So this is also some of the courses that is on carbon management that is also being offered by ASME. So anyone who is interested can actually feel free to approach us, me, Rice, and we'll be providing the information. The idea is actually to have understanding about what it means to have a carbon reduction and how to measure. It's not that complicated actually, so it's good to actually go through that exercise. And it's the thing about sustainability and decarbonization. People think this is something very big and requires a lot of time and effort to embark this journey, right? But actually, it isn't the case. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and it's good to appreciate some of them and see how we can actually be part of it. I think together, in addition to it, there's also, as part of TR56, it requires the people who's involved in LNG bunkering to go through some of the training. So there is one on LNG bunkering courses that is applicable to both managerial and operation positions. I think being offered by SP. This will be actually one interesting one as well to know the fundamentals and considerations for LNG usage. There's also a lot of courses that is actually listed under MCF. You can refer to the MPA website and look for those that is related to LNG. A lot more beyond M&OE sector, I would say, but indeed quite interesting courses. And there's also a lot of people, a private funded courses that is on LNG that is available in the market, and you can go and attend.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just to add on, so SME is planning to have a masterclass related to LNG in collaboration with GTT and NTU. Okay, so we have come to our end of the webinar, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And you have a better understanding on the emerging demand of LNG in Asia and the role of Singapore's M&OE sector. Should you have any questions, you may do so. Drop your queries to admin@sb.com, and we'll be having the next webinar session, and we welcome you to join in for the last webinar session. And thank you so much, and we hope to see you everyone soon. Goodbye.